Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the Roman Empire, sits in his military tent on the frozen banks of the Danube River. Outside, barbarian armies threaten Rome's borders. Inside his own court, senators plot against him. His own son disappoints him. His body aches with illness. Yet in his private journal, he writes something remarkable. Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been. This wasn't the writing of a man in denial. This was the philosophy of someone who had discovered something profound, that the power we give our enemies is entirely our choice. We live in a world obsessed with enemies. We scroll through social media, watching people tear each other apart. We lie awake replaying confrontations in our minds. We craft perfect comebacks for arguments that ended hours ago. We build entire narratives around people who wronged us, carrying their weight like invisible chains. But what if I told you that over 2,000 years ago, a group of philosophers discovered a secret so powerful that it could make your enemies completely irrelevant? Not through revenge, not through avoidance, but through a radical shift in perspective that changes everything. The Stoics weren't armchair philosophers theorizing about life from positions of comfort. Epictetus was born a slave. Seneca was exiled and eventually forced to take his own life by Nero. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire while plague ravaged his people and enemies surrounded his borders. These were people who faced real adversaries, real threats, real harm. And yet they developed a framework that rendered their enemies powerless without lifting a sword. Today, we're going to explore this ancient secret, and I promise you, by the end of this journey, you'll never look at conflict the same way again. The fundamental shift: understanding what you actually control. The entire foundation of making your enemies irrelevant rests on one of Stoicism's most fundamental principles, articulated perfectly by Epictetus. Some things are within our power, while others are not. This sounds simple, almost obvious, but sit with it for a moment. Really consider what you actually control. You don't control what other people say about you. You don't control whether someone tries to sabotage your career. You don't control if someone spreads rumors, betrays your trust, or works actively against your interests. You don't even control whether someone physically attacks you. What you do control is remarkably small: your own thoughts, judgments, desires, and actions. That's it. That's the entire list. Most people hear this and feel disempowered, but the Stoics discovered this was actually the source of ultimate power. Because when you truly internalize this distinction, something magical happens. You stop trying to control the uncontrollable, and you redirect all that wasted energy toward what you actually can change. Think about how much mental energy you spend trying to control what your enemies think, say, or do. You imagine confrontations, you plan preventative strategies, you try to predict their moves, you attempt to change their minds or defend your reputation. All of this is energy poured into the uncontrollable. It's like trying to stop the ocean's waves with your bare hands. Marcus Aurelius put it this way: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Your enemy's actions belong to them. Their thoughts about you belong to them. Their attempts to harm you belong to the external world of things you cannot control. But your response, that's entirely yours. The dichotomy of control in action. Let's make this concrete. Imagine a colleague is spreading false rumors about you at work, trying to undermine your position. The typical response involves a mental spiral. How could they? What will people think? I need to defend myself. I need to expose them. I need to make sure everyone knows the truth. Notice what's happening here. You're trying to control their behavior, other people's opinions, your reputation, and the entire social dynamic of your workplace. You've just grabbed hold of 5 or 6 things completely outside your control, and you're exhausting yourself trying to manipulate them. The Stoic approach is radically different. You acknowledge, I cannot control what this person says. I cannot control whether others believe them. I cannot control my reputation in others' minds. But I can control my own actions, my own character, and my own response. This doesn't mean you do nothing. It means you do only what's within your power. You focus on being excellent at your job. You act with integrity in all your dealings. If there's a factual correction to be made in an appropriate venue, you make it calmly and move on. Then you release it. You don't carry it. You don't obsess. You don't let this person's actions dictate your inner state. This is where enemies become irrelevant. They remain active in the world, yes, but they're no longer active in your mind. They no longer have the power to disturb your peace, derail your focus, or diminish your joy. The power of indifference to external outcomes. The Stoics had a term for things outside our control: indifference. This doesn't mean you don't care about anything. It means you recognize that external outcomes should not determine your inner state or your sense of self-worth. Seneca was one of the wealthiest men in Rome, yet he wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." He understood that his wealth was an indifferent, something that could be taken away at any moment, and indeed it was when he was exiled. But his character, his principles, his ability to respond with wisdom, those were his true possessions, and no enemy could touch them. When you grasp this deeply, your enemies lose their primary weapon, the ability to threaten you with loss. They can threaten your reputation, your position, your possessions, even your physical safety. But if you've already recognized these as indifference, as things not essential to your true self, what power do they really have? This is not about becoming cold or unfeeling. It's about building an inner fortress that cannot be breached by external circumstances. Marcus Aurelius described it beautifully. The universe is change. Our life is what our thoughts make it. Your enemy can change your circumstances, but only you can change your life, because your life is constituted by your thoughts and responses. Reframing enemies as teachers. Here's where Stoic philosophy takes a turn that surprises most people. Rather than viewing enemies as obstacles to be overcome or defeated, the Stoics saw them as essential instruments of growth. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Your enemy, in trying to harm you, actually provides you with the perfect training ground for virtue. Consider this: how do you develop patience without impatient people? How do you cultivate forgiveness without people who wrong you? How do you practice resilience without adversity? Your enemies are, in effect, unpaid coaches in the gymnasium of life, providing resistance training for your character. Epictetus took this even further. He said that when someone treats you badly, they're giving you an opportunity to practice kindness. When someone tries to provoke you, they're offering you a chance to practice self-control. When someone betrays you, they're creating space for you to practice wisdom and discernment. This reframe is psychologically powerful because it transforms your relationship with opposition. Your enemy is no longer a threat to be feared or an obstacle to be eliminated. They're a sparring partner in your development. And you don't hate your sparring partner. You might even feel grateful for the workout. This doesn't mean you trust people who've proven untrustworthy or that you expose yourself unnecessarily to harm. The Stoics weren't naive. It means you extract the developmental value from every interaction while maintaining appropriate boundaries. the practice of negative visualization, or premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. This involves regularly imagining the worst things that could happen, including the worst your enemies could do. This might sound pessimistic, but it's actually the opposite. When you've mentally rehearsed the worst-case scenario, you removes its power to shock or devastate you. You've already processed it. You've already developed a response. You've already recognized that even in the worst case, you retain your ability to respond with virtue. Seneca practiced this constantly. He would imagine losing his wealth, his position, his freedom. He would contemplate exile, illness, death, not to torture himself, but to prepare himself. When Nero eventually ordered his death, Seneca met it with remarkable composure, continuing to philosophize with his friends even as he died. His enemies could take his life, but they couldn't take his peace, because he'd long since imagined this scenario and made his peace with it. You can apply this to your own enemies. What's the worst they could do? Ruin your reputation? Get you fired? Turn others against you? Sit with these scenarios. Really imagine them. Then ask yourself, even if this happened, could I still maintain my character? Could I still act with integrity? Could I still find meaning and purpose? The answer is almost always yes. And once you know that, your enemy's power evaporates. Responding with virtue, not reaction. The Stoics made a crucial distinction between reaction and response. A reaction is automatic, emotional, unconsidered. A response is deliberate, reasoned, virtuous. When your enemy attacks you and you immediately lash out, you've reacted. You've allowed them to control your behavior. You've become a puppet dancing on their strings. Marcus Aurelius warned against this. How much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it? But when you pause, consider your principles, and then act in alignment with your values, regardless of provocation, you've responded. You've maintained your autonomy. You've acted from your true self rather than from triggered emotion. This is where the Stoic virtues become your guide: wisdom, justice, courage, and self-discipline. When faced with an enemy's action, you ask, what would wisdom suggest here? What does justice require? What would courage look like? What does self-discipline demand? Sometimes this means speaking truth firmly. Sometimes it means strategic silence. Sometimes it means removing yourself from the situation. But whatever it means, it comes from you, not from them. They may have initiated the situation, but you determine the response, and in that determination, you reclaim all your power. Epictetus put it perfectly. It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Your enemy can create circumstances, but they cannot create your character's response to those circumstances. That's yours alone. The ultimate freedom, maintaining inner peace. At the core of the Stoic secret is something profound. True freedom is internal, not external. You can be imprisoned and free. You can be emperor and enslaved. It all depends on the state of your mind. Epictetus knew this intimately. Born a slave, physically disabled, owned by another human being, he had every reason to feel powerless. Yet he became one of history's most influential philosophers on freedom because he discovered that no one could enslave his mind without his permission. He taught, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. Every moment you spend disturbed by your enemy's actions, you are enslaved. Every moment you maintain your equanimity regardless of their actions, you are free. This is the ultimate irrelevance of enemies. They simply cannot touch what matters most: your inner peace, your character, your freedom of thought. They can circle around you like wolves, but if your inner citadel is secure, they circle in vain. Marcus Aurelius, despite being emperor, understood he needed to guard this inner freedom vigilantly. Confine yourself to the present. Don't let your enemies occupy your mind when they're not even in the room. Don't let past grievances or future fears steal your present peace. The present moment is the only place you truly live, and it's the only place your enemies can't reach unless you invite them in. Practical implementation, daily Stoic practices. So how do you actually implement this philosophy? The Stoics were intensely practical, and they developed specific practices. Start each morning with a reminder of what you control. Epictetus suggested beginning the day by saying, "Today I will meet people who are meddlesome, ungrateful, violent, treacherous, envious, and unsociable." Not to be pessimistic, but to be prepared. When you expect difficulty, you're not caught off guard by it. Throughout the day, practice the pause. When you feel triggered by an enemy's action, stop, take a breath. Ask yourself, is this within my control? If not, let it go. If yes, ask, what would virtue suggest? Then act accordingly. In the evening, review your day. Where did you give away your power? Where did you let someone else's actions determine your inner state? Where did you maintain your composure? This isn't about self-judgment, it's about learning and improving. Keep a journal, as Marcus Aurelius did. Write down your reflections on these principles. When you feel disturbed by an enemy, write about it using Stoic principles. This externalizes the turmoil and allows you to examine it rationally. The invincible life. The Stoic secret to making your enemies irrelevant isn't a trick or a hack. It's a complete transformation of how you relate to opposition, adversity, and conflict. It's the recognition that you are not a leaf blown about by the winds of others' actions, but a rock unmoved by the storm. Your enemies will do what they will do. This is outside your control. But your character, your peace, your inner freedom, these are your domain, and they are impregnable unless you open the gates yourself. When you truly embody this philosophy, something remarkable happens. You stop having enemies in any meaningful sense. There are simply people who oppose you, and that opposition becomes as relevant to your inner state as weather is to a mountain. The rain comes, the wind blows, the mountain remains. This is not about becoming hard or uncaring, it's about becoming unshakable in what matters most. The Stoics loved deeply, cared deeply, engaged deeply with life, but they did so from a foundation of inner strength that no enemy could undermine. Marcus Aurelius, facing plots and betrayals even from his own family, wrote words that echo across millennia. The best revenge is not to be like your enemy. This is the final secret. Your enemies become irrelevant not when you defeat them, but when you refuse to let them determine who you are. You are the author of your character. You are the guardian of your peace. You are the sovereign of your inner kingdom. And in that sovereignty lies a freedom and power that no enemy can touch, no circumstance can steal, and no external event can diminish. This is the Stoic secret. This is the path to making your enemies irrelevant, not by destroying them, not by avoiding them, but by building something within yourself so strong, so centered, so aligned with virtue, that their opposition becomes merely the background noise to a life well lived. The choice is yours. It always has been. Choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been. Your enemies are only as relevant as you allow them to be. Today, you can begin the practice of allowing them to be nothing at all.